All right, I think we'll have a few more folks joining us, but let's go ahead and get started. I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. So welcome everyone. Again, this is Julia Kim. I'm with the Local Government Commission, and we organize the Biennial California Adaptation Forum. And this is the first session of a two-part series that we're hosting to gather early input around equity and inclusivity to inform our planning activities before they launch. So just to provide a quick overview of the California Adaptation Forum, again, this is organized by the Local Government Commission, and the main purpose of this forum, which is held biennially, is to gather California's adaptation community, which includes leaders and practitioners from a diverse range of sectors and disciplines, and to provide opportunities for participants to learn about the latest science, policies, tools, and resources, helping folks connect with their peers, to share knowledge and build connections, and to also create mutual support to transition from awareness and planning to action throughout California. And we, of course, do this through a series of plenary and breakout sessions, implementation-focused workshops, tours, networking activities, and other activities we feature at the forum. And after each forum, we work to improve our planning process and to explore new creative strategies to provide a more valuable experience for our participants. Oops, let me advance my slide. Okay, so looking at the history of CAF, we started in 2014 is when we had our first forum, and admittedly, we did the poorest job, to be completely honest, as far as the history of the adaptation forums that we organized in terms of addressing equity and making that front and center. We received a lot of great input and feedback from participants and speakers around how we can better incorporate equity into the forum and make that more of a central theme. And in 2016, we launched an equity advisory committee, established some key goals along metrics to really prioritize equity and justice and make that front and center. We had a separate track that was focused on climate justice and different aspects of equity and adaptation, a big focus around community engagement, and work to bring on speakers from frontline communities who could speak to their experiences. And we also launched our scholarship program in 2016. In 2018, trying to continue evolving the California Adaptation Forum based on how we did in 2016 and based on feedback we received, we focused more so on integration. We convened an equity and tribal advisory committee, and from that committee, we heard from folks that instead of calling out equity and justice separately and not focusing on integrating, we should really be doing both. So in 2018, our last forum, that's where we organized the program development process to really strive and include discussions around equity in each session. Rather than having a separate track that was focused on equity, we tried to integrate that and infuse that throughout the program. And now, looking ahead for 2020, we really want to continue progressing along this kind of continuum and continuing to focus on prioritizing and integrating equity, and now starting to mainstream equity into the adaptation discussion. So this kind of gives you a 10,000-foot level of how CAF has evolved throughout the years. And today, what we're really hoping to do is hear from all of you to identify opportunities to enhance the 2020 forum. And it's really looking at three areas. The first, looking at the content, what we feature and how we feature equity content. The second, looking at participation and inclusivity. How can we welcome additional voices into the California Adaptation Forum and diversify our participants and make CAF more inclusive? And then finally, just recognizing that the forum is a snapshot in time, and it is a single event, but it can be leveraged to support the broader equity and social justice movement. So thinking about how we can leverage CAF to increase overall engagement in various equity efforts. So before we dive in to some of the key questions, I wanted to highlight some of the goals that we had for our 2018 forum and kind of how we did. I would say overall, we did pretty well, but we did miss the mark in a few places in terms of not quite hitting the goals that we set. So these goals were developed by the Equity and Tribal Advisory Committee in 2018. So the first goal was to make sure equity was addressed in each plenary session. We did have our first plenary session focused around social justice and equitable adaptation, and we also infused those conversations into the other two plenaries that were more so focused on governance and financing. And hopefully you saw that if you attended the forum. Our second goal was to try to bring on speakers who could directly address how climate change affects frontline communities. We set a goal of 50%, and we exceeded that slightly with 55% of breakout sessions and workshops, including a speaker who could address those issues directly. And then we had another goal of having 80% of sessions to include dedicated time to discuss climate justice and equity. So on that note, it was, we didn't quite hit our target. We had about 75% of sessions and workshops having dedicated time to discuss equity and justice. I will note that, you know, if we counted all of the sessions that, you know, at least said something about equity, that percentage would be much higher, but we really evaluated the program to think through if those sessions did in fact carve out time, not just to mention equity, but to really provide those opportunities for speakers to expand on those pieces and discussion opportunities for the participants. Now, shifting gears to participation, we had two key goals here. So first was to raise $25,000 to support travel scholarships. We did exceed that and raised $40,500, which is great. Hopefully we'll bring in additional scholarships beyond that for 2020. And as many of you know, cost is the largest barrier that we hear from folks in terms of being able to attend conferences. So we're happy that we were able to exceed our goal of $25,000 there. And then we also had a goal of having 20 to 25% of all attendees from communities of color. We of course don't, when we ask for when we include questions around demographics in the registration form, we don't necessarily require every registrant to select. So I would say there were a number of registrants who did note that they, you know, prefer not to say as the option, but we did fall within that range that we were aiming for, with 24.4% of participants identifying with an ethnicity other than white. Lastly, in terms of engagement, I think this is a trickier one for us to track. Definitely curious to dig into this a bit further with folks on the line, but we had two broad goals that the committee identified. So one was to provide opportunities for participants to engage in equity discussions throughout the program. For that, we worked with Resilient Communities Initiative, which is an environmental justice focused coalition of EJ organizations in the Bay Area, to organize a workshop, an invite-only workshop for community-based organizations and funders. And then, as I previously noted, we did have about 75% of sessions and workshops, including dedicated time to discuss equity. And then the last goal was to infuse equity information throughout the CAF website and promotional materials. We did try to provide learning opportunities leading up to the 2018 forum. So we developed an environmental justice history webpage, and then also featured equitable adaptation and traditional ecological knowledge as themes for our blog that we had. And I think we had maybe like 5 to 10 blogs submitted for those themes. And then below, you can also see a couple quotes that we received through the survey from folks kind of recognizing our efforts to infuse equity and justice as part of the program. So those are the goals that we had for 2018. I'm happy to flip back through those during our discussion if it would be helpful to reference them. But I'd love to now stop talking so much and give folks the opportunity to jump in and share your thoughts. So hopefully everyone kind of was able to connect their audio, so either by phone or by computer. If you're not able to connect your audio, feel free to submit some ideas through the chat panel or through the Q&A module. But again, we would love to hear you directly. So moving on, we have a series of, I think, 5 or 6 questions that we're hoping to dig into, and then we'll save some time towards the end for open input. If you are able to raise your hand, that should be an option in the Zoom platform for you. I'll go ahead and unmute you. So the first question, pretty broad and was actually submitted by someone, by a registrant, is what key barriers do you see to advancing equitable adaptation from a cultural, financial, access, or other perspective? So we wanted to start this listening session a bit more broadly to think about those key barriers to advance equitable adaptation more broadly, to frame our discussion, and then from there we'll have some more specific questions in terms of how we can improve the California Adaptation Forum. So let me stop there and would love to hear from folks on the line. And again, if you use the hand raising feature, I'll be able to see that on my end and unmute you so we can hear your ideas. And if you're having a hard time using that feature, or if you're not able to connect through audio, if you submit anything through the chat feature, I'll be sure to read that out loud. But again, we're trying to hear from all of you, to hear from all of you about some of those key barriers to advancing equitable adaptation, to kind of kick off this discussion. Any initial thoughts? All right, maybe this question might be a little too broad to start with. So, oh, actually, we have a chat coming in. So there's a question from Roxanne, if we have a financial goal to reach. And in terms of financial goal, are you thinking kind of a financial goal for the adaptation field more broadly, or for the California Adaptation Forum specifically? Okay, so just for the forum, we do have a sponsorship target of about $250,000. That would be to help offset the cost of the forum and keep the registration costs at the same rate, roughly, compared to the 2018 forum. Roxanne had another question, if it's already funded. It is not fully funded yet. We just launched our sponsorship recruitment efforts last month. So we are getting some commitments coming in, but we'll be continuing to recruit sponsors really up until the forum. Last year, I believe we were able to bring in around 200,000. So we want to exceed that goal a bit, just given how the forum has been growing. Okay. All right, team, I'm going to move on to our next question. I would love to hear from folks on the line, and we can always circle back on this question. I know it's rather broad. So the next question I wanted to ask to all of you is what topics you're most interested in seeing covered at the 2020 California Adaptation Forum from an equity perspective. So I would say in years past, a lot of focus has been more so on the community engagement side, which I'm sure many of you will agree is really critical. I imagine we will continue to cover that at the next forum, but wanted to see if there are any other topics you think would be really important for adaptation practitioners who will be attending the forum to hear about and learn about from an equity perspective. Awesome, Maggie, I see your hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Monica, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
I can. Hi, Maggie.
Hi. So what I was thinking that would be really important to cover is assessing health vulnerabilities of these communities that are impacted by climate change, indigenous communities, climate exposures and impacts, and how tribes can begin assessing health vulnerabilities and adaptation plans. I don't know if that's something that is covered, like physical wellness, mental and emotional, regarding cultural sites, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. We have featured various sessions around health equity in the past. I think last year we could have done a much better job. So it's great to hear from you that assessing health vulnerabilities and climate exposures and impacts would be really important. That's certainly something that we will want to do for this coming year.
Right, for like air quality, water quality, homes, infrastructure, treaty trust resources, protecting treaty trust resources along with tribal sovereignty and self-determination. Like you guys said, you included traditional ecological knowledge, partially. Did you include that last year?
Mm-hmm. We
And
did, but I think we could always do a better job with featuring traditional ecological knowledge and yeah, I think last year compared to previous years, we did a much better job in terms of having more tribal speakers. So we'd love to kind of continue down that path and not lose sight of it just because we did a better job last year. We want to make sure we're continuing to do that and set a higher bar for us for 2020.
right there, I mean, it's so awesome to be a part of this, even though you guys are, I'm kind of far away, but as a tribal person, the things that I would love to see at a conference is, equal opportunity to include, voices on plants, trees, the wildlife, agriculture. There's agriculture, ties to traditional ecological knowledge and wildlife, plants, trees in the forest, traditional burning techniques for fires. Um, there's just so many different things that could be brought up with talking about the climate change exposures and impacts on vulnerable communities, healthcare facilities, emergency systems, water systems and structures. And, it just goes on and on and on, like FEMA, emergency response and preparedness is also a part of climate change in certain communities from being absolutely removed from their traditional home sites. But I think one of the challenges that a lot of tribes face is long-term funding to continue the adaptation planning and then continue on to be being resilient in this climate change emergency we're all facing.
Right. It's like one after the other too. Our state can't seem to catch a break, and it's become a new normal for us.
Right, and
Awesome.
it seems like
Mhm.
one of the main challenges also is trying to get community engagement and to get the tribal councils to view this as a priority. So
Mhm.
that, I mean, that's a bigger barrier, in the bigger scheme of things is to get the, climate change 101 through to some people.
Mhm.
So
Definitely.
that's all I really,
It's super.
really, was about the health impacts, how it impacts treaty trust resources, food sovereignty, um, things like that.
Mhm. Awesome. Thanks so much,
Oh, no
Maggie.
problem. Like,
I'm
and
gonna.
like
I'm gonna.
codes, even how to write codes, your own climate change codes and regulations and community engagement and outreach, education, things like that.
Mhm. So I'm hearing not even just the content, but really the skills and capacity building that's needed, just like you said, in terms of writing code, conducting the right type of community engagement, all those things.
Right, and what, you know, how was their community even involved in climate change, or in the region, or, you know, there's a lot of tribes that are don't even know, and then there's advanced tribes that have, you know, written climate change policy and procedures, and there's, you know, like the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, the National Congress of American Indians, you know, they're all, you know, trying to collaborate in a larger picture, but, you know, down to the region and state sizes, it seems like it's like the connection isn't there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, thank you, Maggie. I'm going to mute you for now since we've gotten a number of additional comments coming in through the chat feature that I want to read out loud for folks, as it might give others on the line some additional ideas. So again, please feel free to use the hand raising feature. I love hearing your voice, Maggie. I'd love to hear from others as well. We had a comment from Alex Dennis, who's with World Disability Institute. And he said, building disability inclusive adaptation can cost more than inaccessible systems, but that costs less than retrofits later on. So accessible systems should be the norm in policy and practice. Thank you, Alex, for that comment. I think you're totally right. We need to be pretty cost effective at this point. Don't want to have to go back and do more costly retrofits later on. I think the idea of universal design is one that's been getting a little more traction, but certainly I think we can leverage CAF to kind of highlight that concept a bit more. We have another comment from Monica with CPUC, saying that one major challenge is adapting at the speed necessary to meet climate challenges such as wildfires, but also needing to balance deep community engagement needs. For example, reaching populations with limited English or access and functional needs. I think you're totally right. I'd love to hear from others as well on that notion of this urgency that needs to be balanced with the time that it takes to create authentic relationships with the community. Yeah, that's a really good point. And then another topic, you know, what are partnerships and strategies that work at the speed of the issues and disasters that we're facing? Another really good point. And then we have a comment from Carolyn, who's with Harrison Associates. Community-owned energy. I would like to see a conversation about how we can develop a more equitable energy system, and considering what is the impact of power outages on vulnerable groups, and what distributed energy models can address these vulnerabilities. I'm sure many of the communities that you work in or serve might have been impacted by the recent wave of public safety power shutoffs. I think that's going to be a major topic that we'll see covered at the 2020 forum, especially in light of new legislation that has been chaptered in regards to that. Carolyn also noted community developed climate adaptation plans and case studies of those. Yeah, that's a really good point. And then we have another comment from Roxanne. Agreement with Maggie that emergency preparedness is important, and with the potential of getting the community emergency response training or CERT program involved. I think that's a really good idea. And then we did get another suggestion on engaging with Government Alliance on Race and Equity. Awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts. Wanted to see if there's anything else in terms of topics that you'd like to see covered from an equity perspective before we move on. And actually, before we move on, another question I had that's related to this is how we can best structure this content. So I wanted to see if folks have any ideas in terms of how we can feature this content, how we can structure the sessions in a way that would be most appropriate and effective in terms of presenting those equity topics. Any thoughts on kind of session structures or formats, anything you've seen work particularly well and maybe at other conferences you've attended before we move on? All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Folks might be putting some comments in. On the content side, we do have a couple of additional comments here. So sorry, I might not pronounce your name correctly, so I apologize in advance. I think from Ona, seconding the interest in learning more about traditional ecological knowledge. The aspect that they're interested in is whether Native nations would share in how to teach the philosophical or ideological background of living sustainably on our planet, and how we teach the broader society to imbue environmental impacts on behavior choices. Really good point there. Another topic suggestion from Tiffany over at City of Santa Cruz, how to use social vulnerability assessments to identify and tailor adaptation strategies. That's a great point there. A few other comments in terms of how to feature the topics. I'm hearing from Jennifer, breakout sessions by topics, so really making that topic front and center. And then Carolyn had a kind of counter comment in a way, rather than having equity specific sessions, working on a more integrated approach. So looking at energy and equity or heat mitigation and equity. I think that's a really good point there. It could provide an opportunity for folks who might be more interested on the technical side of some of these topics to then, learn about the equity perspective as well. And then another comment from Maggie, nature-based solutions that increase the resilience of communities and ecosystems to climate change while also significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Awesome. Okay, any other final comments? If not, I'll go ahead and keep things moving along. I'm getting another second on the comment that Tiffany shared in terms of the social vulnerability assessments, how they can be used to prioritize adaptation investments in particular. Okay, moving on then. So I wanted to pose this question in terms of how to best structure the program to integrate and feature equity content. So as I noted, in 2016, we had a separate track that was focused on just equity and justice. And then in 2018, we really tried to integrate equity and justice into the forum's cross-cutting tracks. And we did have a couple of tracks that kind of opened the doors a bit more for equity-specific conversations. We had one that was focused on grounding adaptation and community engagement, and then another on pathways for psychosocial resilience. So getting at that mental and psychosocial health side of adaptation and climate impacts. So just as a quick question, would love to hear from folks, would it be better to have a separate track or to integrate? And with that, I'm actually going to administer a quick poll. Since that will be a quick one to do. Okay, so let me administer that poll now. So that should be coming up on your screen. So want to get a sense from folks, should we have a separate track on equity? Should we focus on integrating equity into all tracks? Or maybe we should do both? All right, keep those votes coming in, and I'll show the results in a moment, getting some interesting votes coming in. All right, I'm going to give another 10 seconds, so get your votes in. I think we've heard from 60% of folks on the line so far. Let's see if we can get that number to go up a bit. All right. All right, I'm going to end the poll in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, so the results should be up on your screen now. So we actually had most folks vote for both, that we should have a separate track on equity while also integrating equity into all tracks. I'd love to hear from folks on the line now in terms of having equity as a separate track. What would that look like? What kind of how would we best structure that? So it could be maybe more so focused on some of the topics that folks proposed in the last slide, or maybe, yeah, I mean, I guess that would be the main option, but definitely curious to hear from folks in terms of what a separate equity track could look like. I'd love to see some hands raised, so y'all don't get tired of just hearing my voice. So feel free to raise that hand, and if your audio is connected, and hopefully it is. Okay, I'm getting, oh yes, we have a hand raised. Carolyn, I'm going to unmute you now. Carolyn? Carolyn, can you hear me? Okay. I'm not, let's see, let's try that again. Okay, Carolyn, I just unmuted you. Well, sounds like you're working on it. I will keep you unmuted, so jump in as soon as you get connected. But for now, I'll share some comments that we received through the chat. So, so one comment is focused on integrating, thinking that the best way to structure the program would be to integrate equity into all tracks, since a lot of times people that focus on equity in their jobs are lumped together in equity-focused sessions and don't necessarily meet new people or build important connections. I think that's a really good point there. Roxanne also had a comment. You know, some people may want just an equity track, so it might be worth providing that. Maybe structuring that track as an equity 101 track, and then also working to integrate equity into all tracks. Carolyn, is your audio set up? Do you want to jump in? Okay, all right. It looks like that time it didn't work, but again, feel free to raise your hands, y'all, and I will unmute you. Okay, so it looks like generally a mixed bag here. Some folks want to integrate across and just integrate, while others want to have a separate track and integration. So I think that's something that we'll take up with the Program Advisory Committee. And that's something that I should have noted. This time around, we're actually not convening a separate equity advisory committee. Rather, we've invited equity leaders, community leaders, tribal leaders to join the Program Advisory Committee, so we can really work to mainstream this discussion. So that's something that we'll take up with the Program Advisory Committee. All right, team, let's keep things moving. So that was that kind of covers the content side for now, but let's move on to participation. So we're really striving to increase participation at the California Adaptation Forum from a more diverse audience. I think that needs to happen from both angles, right? So, you know, one, how can we make CAF more inclusive and make it, I guess, make it more interesting and appealing to community leaders and other kind of priority populations to attend. And then the flip side of that is, how do we reduce the barriers to participation for folks who are interested in attending, but they're not able to? We have a question from Jennifer, who predominantly attends the California Adaptation Forum. So it's really a mix of nonprofits, local and regional agencies, state agencies, academic institutions, private sector folks. I think We have most participants are from public agencies or nonprofits. I think it's probably like even Stevens between those two groups. I would say private sector is slightly smaller. Same thing with academic institutions. Yeah, so at a high level, that's kind of this, you know, from a sector standpoint, where folks are coming from. I would say geographically, the usual suspects, we have strong participation from major urban areas. I think it's more challenging for folks from more rural communities to attend. I think just based on, I would imagine, just even the challenges with traveling and getting there. A comment from Linda, are we able to digitize the sessions where people can still join remotely? We have considered that in the past. It just becomes extremely expensive for us to hire an outside AV company to broadcast. So we've done that in the past with plenary sessions, at least recording it and making it available. But if we were to make kind of live stream all of the sessions, it would be rather expensive. So we haven't been able to do that in the past. And I think another concern that we have is having the sessions available digitally or remotely could deter in-person participation. And we feel really strongly that the in-person networking time is really valuable. We're definitely curious to hear from others if you think that, you know, making the sessions accessible online and live streaming would be really important to do. And we have another question from Jennifer. Could you tell us again who you want to target? So, I mean, that's another question for the group. You know, who are the key stakeholders we should be targeting? For us in the past, for 2018, we had a big focus on tribal leaders and tribal members, from youth and emerging leaders, and then from frontline communities, including mostly CBOs who work with communities of color or other under-resourced frontline communities. A comment from Roxanne, can we somehow partner with or have a discount offer through Metrolink, which has opened a lot more train stations in the area? That's a great point. We have worked with transit providers in the past, so I think that's a great idea for us to continue doing that for 2020. Any other comments from folks on the line? You know, are there other barriers that you're aware of aside from maybe cost and time as the usual suspects in terms of participating in CAF from your communities? All right, getting a comment from Jennifer. It'd be great to spread the word a bit more to universities and other types of organizations. If you have suggestions for organizations or networks we should reach out to, that'd be great if you could chat that in to the chat portal, and we'll make sure to add that to our list. I'm getting suggestions like land managers, folks from the ag sector. Awesome, getting some additional ideas. So keep those coming, since we do, you know, we do promote this event through promotional partners quite a bit. So finding those right partners is really important to make sure we're spreading the word to the right, to our target populations. Okay, let's keep things moving along. And I think at this rate, we might be able to wrap up a bit early. I'm sure folks will appreciate having some time back to their days since we're all so busy. So our last kind of focused question here is how we can leverage CAF to increase overall engagement in equity, justice, inclusivity, and diversity beyond the event. So as I noted earlier on in this call, CAF is really a snapshot in time. It's a single event. Of course, with that, there are a lot of opportunities leading up to how we shape the program, the type of content that we feature, but wanted to hear from folks on the line. Are there other opportunities in which we can better leverage CAF to support the broader equity and justice movement and really mainstream equity in the adaptation profession? Not seeing any hands raised, not seeing any comments coming in. Oh, we have a comment from a couple folks from Jennifer, having active brainstorming sessions during breakouts that then form work groups with goals. That's a great point there. I think that's a key challenge, at least from my perspective, attending a lot of conferences, how to take the content that you learn and take action on it and make it more actionable. So infusing that as part of the session structure, I think, is a great idea. Another comment from Carolyn, bring in groups from the New Economy Coalition and other groups working on building an equitable, low carbon economy. Awesome. Another question I have for the group is there a place in the forum to talk about how we can help community members meet their basic needs? Just taking a step back and thinking about community adaptive capacity. If your basic needs aren't met, having additional capacity to engage in climate adaptation, to think about, the next emergency is quite limited if you're, again, if you're really focused on meeting your basic needs. Is there a place to have those types of conversations at the forum? And if so, how could we do that? How should we do that in a way where it still makes sense? Or how could we do that in a way where it still aligns with the CAF purpose, which is really focused on adaptation, which equity should, of course, be part of? Not getting any comments coming in. I don't see hands raised, but we did have a good question coming in from Linda. Are there professional development sessions? So this kind of goes back to what Maggie noted in terms of the capacity building and skills developing types of sessions that would be appreciated. In terms of professional development sessions, are there any other skills that would be beneficial to provide trainings on at the California Adaptation Forum? So I think we already kind of covered from the policy and regulatory side, as well as around community engagement, but are there other key skills and topics that would be well suited for professional development focused sessions? Great comment from Tiffany. Possibly a power analysis how-to workshop. I think that's a really interesting. That would be really interesting and very relevant. A few other comments on the importance of permaculture and soil reconstruction and basic gardening, as well as waste management as an important part of adaptation. We have another comment from Maggie. Tribal cultures and treaty protected rights are place-based, and climate change is altering the health, location, and timing of species, activities, and events in the living world. Traditional cycles of fishing, hunting, and gathering as part of seasonal migrations through the landscape historically gave tribes flexibility and resilience to disturbance. But today, instead of choosing the timing and location of these activities based on the conditions present, tribal communities face the possibility of treaty-protected resources being lost from historical and established fishing, gathering, and hunting areas. That's a really good point, Maggie. I think I'm gonna definitely expect to hear from me probably after this listening session to see how we can best address that at the forum. A few other comments that we're getting, another one from Maggie: tribal cultural values and priorities of environmental stewardship can help frame environmental justice principles and promote the balance between economic benefit and protecting environmental resources, community health, and cultural traditions. And I think that really gets to the heart of the dilemma we have here, really how we balance those different benefits that we're trying to achieve. A few other ideas, session on how to use CalAdapt effectively, maybe a financing resilience workshop, how to use the energy of activists and advocates to add capacity on addressing equity. It's a great point. Maybe one focused on legislative compliance, and then a comment from Jennifer: on the note of meeting basic needs, identify the agencies that provide those services and resources, and making sure community is aware of those, since oftentimes communities aren't. That's a very, very good point there. Awesome. I think we covered a lot. We have a lot of great ideas for topics. I think a lot of what folks shared are very relevant to what we were already thinking in terms of the 2020 forum, but a lot of new ideas as well. So really appreciate everyone sharing those ideas. And lastly, just wanted to make sure we have some, whoops, did we, nope, we covered that one. Yep, wanted to make sure we have some time for folks to share open input, any additional insights or ideas or comments that you'd like to share with us at this time. And this time really being before planning activities launch, as we want to make sure that we go into our main planning stage with your ideas and insights in mind. So I'll pause there and see if folks have any additional comments to share. All right, I'm not seeing anything come in, so just to be mindful of everyone's time, I think we can go ahead and wrap up early. I mean, again, this has been incredibly valuable for me to hear all of your ideas. I think the big things that really jumped to the forefront of my mind based on what we heard is, one, there needs to be some professional development, capacity building, maybe skills-focused trainings to equip adaptation practitioners with the knowledge and skills and frameworks in order to make their work more equitable, or to factor in equity as part of their work and to be more effective in that. Also hearing that there are a number of topics that would be very relevant and important to cover as part of the forum that touch on both equity and adaptation. So thinking about the disability community and accessible and universal design, thinking about specific challenges that tribal communities face, while also providing opportunities for tribal communities to share out their knowledge and frameworks and about the work that they're doing. A few comments around financing as an important topic to cover. Definitely hear that time and time again. And then the last couple of comments that we're getting from Jennifer: solutions-focused presentations. Definitely, I think with I would say any climate change conference, I think there's a challenge of recognizing the real risks that we face, while also focusing on the solutions and equipping folks with the tools and strategies to build resilience locally and regionally. And then the last comment that we received from Maggie, also including content around monitoring and research, looking at a baseline environmental data and tracking changing conditions, the abundance and distribution of culturally and economically important species, tracking and managing invasive species, looking at the cumulative effects of habitat degradation, and then coordinating the coordination of collaborative monitoring programs. Awesome. And a couple additional comments that I'll share out loud. And I know it's getting a little redundant maybe just hearing me say these comments out loud, but I think this is a measure to hold LGC accountable. So another comment we got from Carolyn, would really like to see sessions and speakers focusing on how we should be adapting our economy. So really, what does it really mean to move away from business as usual? Sounds like there are so many organizations and nonprofits working in this space, and more equitable economic models out there that should be part of this conversation. So, for example, focusing on worker community-owned enterprises that build local wealth and adaptive capacity. Really great point there, Carolyn. And then from Roxanne, having a topic for eco-grief and how to cope with it. Definitely. I think especially as adaptation practitioners, we're faced with a lot of disasters and pretty devastating news on what seems like a daily basis. So how do we cope with that? And then also new technologies available to give us hope for the future. Love that we're ending on a positive note there. All right, I don't see any other comments coming in. I'm gonna go ahead and keep this webinar open for a few minutes just in case folks are typing out some responses. I can make sure that gets captured, but if you don't have any additional comments, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. So again, thank you all so much. In terms of how this input will be used, I'll be creating a summary document. I'll share that with everyone on the line just to make sure that you see, just to make sure we didn't miss anything that you shared. And we'll be taking this, sharing the summary and the raw comments that we received with our program advisory committee. And our program advisory committee is having its kickoff meeting next month. And the key focus there will be starting to think about how to structure the program in terms of the tracks and types of content to feature. So we'll pick back up on the piece around equity being a separate track or integrating that and a lot more. So thank you all so much again. I know how busy everyone is, so I appreciate your time. I'm giving back 37 minutes back to your day, which hopefully is good news for you. And again, I'm gonna keep the webinar open for a few more minutes in case folks have additional comments to share. But with that, we can officially wrap up, and thank you all so much, and hopefully we'll see you in Riverside in August.